7 Hollywood stars who died in agony because of smoking. They were icons of strength, beauty, and composure. On screen, they stood tall and confident, a cigarette in hand as part of their image. Hollywood turned smoke into style, into identity, into undeniable allure. But off camera, cigarettes did not create legends. They quietly destroyed lungs, weakened bodies, and led these stars into long final years of illness and silence. They did not fall because of scandals or accidents. They faded slowly, year by year, breath by breath, in hospital rooms, while the world still believed they were untouchable. This is not nostalgia. This is classic Hollywood, where glamour could never hide the true cost of the smoke that followed them for a lifetime. Number 1. Clark Gable. Clark Gable's death did not come as a sudden collapse, but as the inevitable ending of decades of quiet self-destruction behind the glow of fame. On the 16th of November 1960, at the age of 59, the man once hailed as the King of Hollywood died from a massive heart attack in Los Angeles. To the public, his passing was shocking, but to those who understood Gable's lifestyle, it was a conclusion foretold long ago. For decades, Clark Gable was a heavy smoker, consuming up to 3 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. Smoking was not just a habit for him, but a part of the masculine image Hollywood worshipped. On screen, the cigarette appeared alongside a half-smile, confident eyes, and a careless swagger, especially in his role as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. But in real life, every drag quietly weakened his cardiovascular system, eroding his body little by little in ways that glamour could not hide forever. In his final years, Gable's health declined silently. He suffered from high blood pressure and endured prolonged strain from smoking and drinking, yet continued to maintain the familiar image of strength. On the 6th of November, 1960, he suffered his first severe heart attack. Doctors regarded it as a clear warning and demanded complete rest and drastic lifestyle changes. But Clark Gable ignored it. He refused to accept weakness and refused to be seen as a star past his prime. In his mind, Gable had to remain Gable, the man who never fell. Just 10 days later, before he had fully recovered, a second heart attack struck, more violent and merciless. This time, his heart could no longer endure. Doctors documented severe arterial damage, the result of decades of smoking that had constricted and scarred his cardiovascular system. The body that once symbolized strength and masculinity could no longer protect itself. Gable's death sent shockwaves through Hollywood, especially as it came only months after he completed The Misfits, the final film of his career, and a farewell-colored work for an entire generation. The King of Hollywood did not fall to scandal, nor to old age, but to the quiet, relentless grip of smoking-related disease. It was a familiar tragedy of classic Hollywood. A radiant exterior concealed a body slowly rotting from within, and when the truth finally emerged, it was already too late to turn back. Number 2 belongs to Humphrey Bogart. For Humphrey Bogart, death did not arrive as a dramatic moment or a sudden collapse, but as a slow, cold, and irreversible process of decay. Esophageal cancer, later metastasizing to the lungs, did not only destroy his body, it struck directly at the ego of a man who once commanded every room he entered. By the time the illness was discovered, it had already gone too far, and all medical efforts were reduced to merely prolonging time. In the final months of his life, after surgery to remove his esophagus, Bogart could no longer swallow normal food. Every meal became a quiet and humiliating struggle. He could only take tiny spoonfuls, slowly and painfully, often turning his face away so no one would have to witness that moment of weakness. It was a devastating psychological blow for a man like Bogart. He had once loved strong liquor, lively parties, and long meals with friends, nights filled with endless conversation where laughter mixed with thick cigarette smoke. For Bogart, eating was not just survival. It was friendship, pleasure, and a sense of control over life itself. When that was taken away, he did not only lose his health, he lost the feeling of being himself. The body that once appeared solid and powerful on screen wasted away at an alarming rate, his weight dropping to just over 30 kilograms. His hands trembled. The sharp, defiant eyes grew tired and distant. The keen intellect that once made rivals cautious was slowly eroded by pain and exhaustion. Yet Bogart still held a cigarette, sometimes only as a reflex, clinging to the image of the man he used to be. It was the bitterest paradox of all. The very thing that built the legend had become its silent executioner. In his final days, Lauren Bacall was always by his side. She watched helplessly as the once cool, confident man who controlled everything gradually lost control over his own body. On screen, cigarettes had been weapons, symbols of toughness and defiance. In real life, they became an invisible cage, draining him one breath at a time. And when the silence finally closed in, Humphrey Bogart departed not as an invincible legend, but as a man betrayed by the very image he had created. Slowly, cruelly, and with no escape, it was the final price paid by a Hollywood icon built on clouds of cigarette smoke. Number 3. John Wayne. John Wayne's death did not come as a sudden fall, but as the prolonged ending of a body that had fought for too long against what it carried within. On the 11th of June, 1979, at the age of 72, the towering symbol of American cinema died in Los Angeles after a brutal battle with stomach cancer, a disease that had quietly spread before medicine could intervene. But this was not the first time John Wayne had faced death. Years earlier, he had undergone a desperate operation for lung cancer, losing an entire lung and several ribs. From that moment on, his body was never whole again. Wayne struggled constantly to breathe, forcing himself to inhale deeply and slowly, often stopping mid-sentence when speaking. For a man who once possessed a booming, thick, commanding voice, one that had dominated deserts on screen, no longer having enough breath to finish a sentence was a direct blow to the pride of a man who lived by strength. For decades, John Wayne was a heavy smoker, consuming up to 5 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day. On film sets, he was rarely seen without a cigarette in his hand. Smoke wrapped around him like a second costume, as familiar as his cowboy hat and slow, solid stride. The image of the Marlboro Man had become deeply embedded in him, even as it destroyed his lungs, weakened his body, and drained his vitality day by day. When stomach cancer was diagnosed in 1978, Wayne understood clearly that this was no longer a battle he could win. The disease had already spread before doctors could act. Those close to him recalled that he did not panic or complain, but grew unusually quiet. Like a soldier who had already seen the outcome of his final fight, his once imposing frame gradually wasted away. His voice shrank into a whisper. The man who once rode horses across deserts now faced a war in which willpower was no longer enough to save the body. John Wayne's funeral brought together politicians, actors, and family members, all honoring a legend who seemed larger than life. But behind the praise lay a raw truth. Decades of smoking had stolen his breath, his vitality, and many years of his life. John Wayne remains an enduring symbol of Hollywood, but the final chapter of his life stands as a harsh reminder that even the strongest cowboy cannot defeat a small enemy called a cigarette. Number 4. Walt Disney. For Walt Disney, the final days of his life carried no trace of a fairy tale. They were a sequence of quiet, cold, and merciless decline. Lung cancer, discovered far too late, quickly took control of his body in a way no magic could reverse. The man who once breathed life into vibrant worlds now faced a harsh reality, where every breath became a struggle. Disney frequently suffered from oxygen deprivation. His breathing grew rapid and shallow, forcing him to sit upright just to inhale. At times, even a few short sentences were enough to exhaust him completely. His throat raw and hoarse from cancer layered on top of decades of relentless smoking. The voice, once familiar in boardrooms, weakened and fractured, as if his very life force were leaving him bit by bit. His body deteriorated rapidly. His weight dropped noticeably. His strength drained away, and persistent coughing and constant fatigue turned the man who once walked tirelessly through Disneyland parks into a patient confined to a hospital bed. Yet physical pain was never what frightened Disney most. What devastated him more deeply was the inability to work. When cancer forced him away from the studio, unable to sketch, unable to meet, unable to pursue new ideas, his spirit visibly collapsed. Those close to him recalled that Disney grew unusually quiet, unlike the man who once spoke endlessly about the future, who lived through ideas, plans, and projects that never seemed to end. Meanwhile, The empire he created continued to operate. Disneyland's gates still opened every morning. Dreams were still sold in tickets each day. Animated characters continued to laugh and speak on screen. But the man who created all of it was slowly being drained of life in silence, separated from the very world he had built. Walt Disney left no public warning behind. His death carried no message, no confession, no repentance. It became a silent lesson, hidden behind a family-friendly image, much like the cigarettes he never wanted children to see. And that is the bitterest paradox of all. The man who lit up the childhoods of millions quietly faded away in the darkness of the very habit that followed him throughout his life. Number 5. Gary Cooper. For Gary Cooper, death did not arrive in a dramatic instant, but as the slow collapse of an icon once considered unshakable. On the 13th of May 1961, at the age of 60, the actor who embodied American virtue and quiet strength died in Beverly Hills after a painful battle with metastatic cancer that began in the lungs, spread to the prostate, and finally reached the bones. For decades, Gary Cooper represented the ideal American man. Tall, soft-spoken, always upright, moving slowly yet decisively in films such as High Noon and Sergeant York. On screen, he stood for integrity, discipline, and restraint. That image ran so deep that the public nearly believed Cooper himself was invulnerable in real life. Yet behind that image was a lifelong cigarette smoker. Cooper routinely smoked 2 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day, from film sets to private life. This habit quietly laid the groundwork for the disease that would destroy him. When Pain and Exhaustion appeared in 1960, the cancer was already advancing rapidly, despite treatment efforts and surgery. By the spring of 1961, Gary Cooper was bedridden, his body wasting away from severe weight loss and weakness. For audiences accustomed to seeing him tall, straight-backed, and steady on his feet, learning that he could barely stand during his final months was a quiet shock. The posture of standing upright, the very symbol of American masculinity, did not vanish in an instant. It was eroded day by disease, until it no longer existed. The warm, steady voice that once gave weight to his performances was reduced to faint whispers. Cooper did not complain, nor did he seek pity. He chose to withdraw in silence, preserving his image until the very end, true to the reserved man he had always been. A few weeks before his death, the Academy honored Gary Cooper with an honorary Oscar, accepted emotionally on his behalf by his close friend James Stewart. Not long after, news of his passing spread, leaving Hollywood stunned to realize that the hero of an era had fallen not to scandal or old age, but to the accumulated cost of decades of smoking. The final chapter of Gary Cooper's life leaves behind a raw truth of classic Hollywood. Even the men who stood the straightest on screen can fall in silence. Number 6. Yul Brynner. For Yul Brynner, death did not arrive as a sudden collapse, but as the prolonged ending of a body drained of life by decades of addiction. On the 10th of October 1985, at the age of 65, the Oscar-winning actor died in New York after a long battle with lung cancer. The man known for his shaved head, commanding presence, and deep, resonant voice, who once ruled both stage and screen, no longer had the breath to sustain the very qualities that made his name. For much of his life, Yul Brynner was a heavy smoker. He began smoking at an early age, and maintained the habit without interruption, often consuming several packs a day, even during rehearsals, in dressing rooms, and backstage. Cigarettes became so closely tied to his image that no one questioned them anymore, even as the smoke was steadily destroying the lungs that powered his voice and presence. The first signs appeared in 1983: persistent coughing, prolonged fatigue, and an increasing shortness of breath. By the time doctors delivered the diagnosis, Brynner was already in the final stage of lung cancer. Despite surgery and treatment, the disease progressed rapidly, leaving few options. Yet in contrast to his failing body, Brynner continued to stand on stage. He returned to The King and I, performing while every breath had grown heavy. Before the audience stood a powerful king. Behind the curtain was an exhausted man, forced to sit and catch his breath. By the time Brynner decided to quit smoking, it was far too late. The cancer had spread beyond cure. What sets his story apart from many other Hollywood legends is how he faced the truth. While many stars died from smoking without ever speaking openly about it, Brenner chose to speak plainly, without avoidance. Before his death, he recorded a message to be broadcast afterward. "Now that I'm gone, I tell you, don't smoke. Whatever you do, don't smoke." It was not a confession, but a cold warning from someone who had already paid the price. Yul Brynner departed as a great artist, a man who brought kings and pharaohs to life on stage and screen. But the final chapter of his life leaves a raw truth of classic Hollywood. Cigarettes, once seen as style and identity, stole his voice, his strength, and the final years of a legend's life, leaving behind not only performances, but a warning impossible to ignore. Number 7. Betty Grable. For Betty Grable, death did not arrive under stage lights, but quietly knocked from behind the posters that once defined her legend. On the 2nd of July, 1973, at the age of 56, the woman known as America's most beloved pin-up girl died of lung cancer in Santa Monica. By the time the disease was discovered, it was already too late. There were no miracles left, no more roles to play, only final days passing in silence. In the 1,940 seconds, Betty Grable was a symbol of vitality and wartime optimism. Her image on World War II posters became a source of encouragement for millions of American soldiers overseas. The radiant smile, perfect figure, and vibrant presence made her the dream girl of an entire generation. But behind that glow was a lifelong smoking habit, part of a seductive image that Hollywood not only accepted, but openly celebrated at the time. When lung cancer began to ravage her body, the decline was swift and merciless. Close friends recalled that Grable's once energetic voice gradually grew hoarse and weak, and at times she had to pause mid-sentence just to catch her breath. For a woman who had sung, danced, and commanded the stage, losing breath also meant losing identity. The abundant energy she once embodied was replaced by constant fatigue and relentless coughing. In her final months, Betty Grable avoided public appearances. She did not want audiences to see her frail and deteriorating state. For an icon who had represented vitality, smiles, and perfect beauty, exposing decline was something she could not accept. That withdrawal made her death feel like a delayed shock to the public, because in their memory, Grable remained forever radiant on wartime posters. When she passed away, the entertainment world was stunned. Her crowded funeral was not only a farewell to films and performances, but a tribute to a symbol of American beauty and vitality. Yet behind the admiration lay a cold truth. Decades of smoking had quietly taken the life of one of the brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age.